Hi, y'all, and welcome to the pop-up live stream. Surprise! Today, I want to talk about Elizabeth Holmes. You're going to be reading in all the newspapers that today is the day she reports to federal prison. But why? Who is she, and why is she reporting to prison? I want to talk about that, unpack her case. Elizabeth Holmes was a golden child of Silicon Valley. She dropped out of college to found Theranos. The company sold a miracle device that would test blood. We'll talk about what that was, the Theranos Sample Processing Unit Mini Lab. But today, Tuesday, May 30th, she is due to report to federal prison in Bryan, Texas, which is just about 100 miles northwest of Houston. She's been sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison, ordered to pay $452 million in restitution to investors who were defrauded. So, what the heck went wrong? Today, we're going to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about what the government says that Elizabeth Holmes did. Then I want to talk about the trial, what she was convicted on, and very importantly, what she was not convicted on, because she won 4 of the 11 counts and the jury hung on another 3. I also want to talk then third about what's happening for her legally right now, what's going to be next. Let's talk about why she was prosecuted first. The reason she was prosecuted was related to a miracle product that Theranos invented, or at least claimed to have invented. It was going to be able to test your blood based on nothing but a finger prick. A drop of blood from your finger would be enough. No more drawing vials of blood, no more transporting the vials of blood. This was going to be so much easier, so much faster, so much cheaper for both the medical profession and, of course, a lot easier for patients. The blood test supposedly could run at least 200 different tests, and it was ramping up to be able to provide 1,000 different tests that could be run from a droplet or 2 of blood taken just from a finger prick. Everything about it was amazing. The slogan was, "One tiny drop changes everything." And the website specifically said that for the first time, the Theranos laboratory could perform tests quickly and accurately on samples as small as a single drop of blood. Faster, cheaper, more accurate. Elizabeth Holmes was worth billions of dollars by the time she was 30, 4.5 billion at the height of her wealth. She was America's youngest self-made female billionaire at one point, and she had a longtime boyfriend who helped her run the company, Sonny Balwani. It was too good to be true. And by that, I mean, really, it was too good to be true. Something like this that sounds too good to be true, but really isn't, is subscribing to the channel or liking the video. You can do those things for absolutely free. So please be sure to do both of those. It will cost you nothing. And even though that sounds too good to be true, it isn't. But as for Theranos, that really was too good to be true. I do want to say a word for my channel regulars too. We normally, I know you're all thinking, what the heck, Lee? Some surprise video. We normally go live at 7 p.m. Eastern on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But with the holiday schedule, things being a little bit off, I decided to do this. This is the very day that Elizabeth Holmes is supposed to report to prison. So I just thought it would be really helpful to be able to know, as you read the articles, why she's going to prison. What's it all about? I personally wanted to know, so I started researching it, and I wanted to share that with you. So here's what the government says that Holmes did. Here's, first of all, the government says she knew that the Theranos machines could only perform a very limited number of tests and that they were not producing reliable results. And furthermore, they were slower, not faster, than the conventional testing. In fact, according to the government, things got so bad that Elizabeth Holmes went out and purchased regular machines and ran the tests on those instead of running them on Theranos machines, because the Theranos machines just weren't up to the task. And then at the same time that they were doing that and knowing about the problems, Holmes and Balwani marketed and promoted the machine, not just to doctors and patients trying to get them to use it, but also to investors. When the company demonstrated the product to investors, they also did something the government called believed was shady, which was they ran something they called the null protocol. So while there was no actual blood being tested in the machine would show, instead of showing error because there was no blood in the machine, an actual result would pop up. So while investors or potential product purchasers were looking at the machine, it would look as if the machine was working right there in front of them, when in fact it was just a mock test result. They called that within Theranos the null protocol. Witnesses also said that Holmes had bragged about Theranos technology being used on medical evacuation helicopters in Afghanistan. At trial, Elizabeth Holmes said she didn't think she had said that. That was actually a common theme with Elizabeth Holmes. She was deposed by the Securities and Exchange Commission and said, "I don't know," 600 times. But she did admit at trial in cross-examination, because she testified at trial, she admitted that there was an agreement between Theranos and the Department of Defense to do a study to see whether or not that product could be used in Afghanistan or in remote areas like that for the military. But there was a lot of work left to do to get to the point where they could start the study. And the company Theranos, simply missed the deadline. The company never got all of the things in place so that the study could begin. So not only was it not used in Afghanistan, it wasn't even studied. It was going to be studied, but it never reached that stage. Elizabeth Holmes' counter, and what she argued at trial, was that Sunny Balwani was behind a lot of this. They had broken up shortly before they were both indicted. And she testified at trial that he had a decade-long campaign of psychological abuse against her, that he told her repeatedly that she was bad at business. He said he was astonished at her mediocrity, that he didn't know what she was doing in business, that he really was controlling with her. He controlled everything from telling her she should only eat few foods that made her pure, to telling her that she should never meet with anyone for more than 5 minutes unless she had written down why she was meeting with that person. She said that he would get very angry with her, and then he would sometimes come upstairs to our bedroom and he would force me to have sex with him when I didn't want to, because he would say that he wanted me to know that he still loved me. Balwani denied all of this, said all of this was completely false. Holmes also told the jury about being raped in college. She said that the commonly known story that she dropped out of college to found Theranos was true, but she also dropped out because she had been raped in college, and that was part of the reason for her leaving. Now, cross-examination of her was, as you can imagine, very, very difficult for her. One of the topics was whistleblower Erica Chung. The whistleblower had come forward to talk about the fact that these tests weren't really being run and that a lot of shady stuff was going on behind the scenes at Theranos. And Elizabeth Holmes admitted that the company had hired 2 private investigative firms to look at the whistleblower and to say and to examine her background. Now, the government tried to get Elizabeth to admit that the Theranos had actually spent $150,000 on investigators to look at the whistleblower. But naturally, Elizabeth Holmes did not know the amount that the company had spent. She also admitted on the stand that the company had been pretty aggressive at going after a Wall Street Journal reporter, John Carreyrou, who was looking into the company and doing investigative reporting about the company. They wanted the stories quashed, and they wanted the reporter to stop reporting on that. There also was word from the government that logos for Pfizer and Schering-Plough were put on Theranos reports. The prosecution said putting those logos on your report makes it look like those companies had something to do with what you are doing here, that this report somehow came from them. She admitted she had personally added the logos to the Theranos report, and that was an important point at trial. There was also word from the government that a certain phrase had been dropped. There was the phrase "prepared for Dr. Aiden Power of Pfizer" that got removed from the report. The combination of having Pfizer's logo and removing the fact that it was prepared for someone at Pfizer, the government said that made it appear that Pfizer was somehow involved in preparing this report. Theranos also used the GlaxoSmithKline logo. GlaxoSmithKline had written up its view on the study, but she used their logo and then removed some of their language. One, for example, language such as finger prick blood draw was difficult. That was not included. And so the government said all of this together created a false impression about what the product was able to do and what companies thought about the product. Let's talk about trial. And because she lost, obviously, she wouldn't be going to jail if she had not, but she also won a considerable number of things. And we'll talk about the difference between those two. Now, trial took place in San Jose, California, and lasted for 15 weeks. And there was a little bit of trial juror drama around it. One juror announced partway into trial that she was Buddhist and wanted to practice compassion and forgiveness. And so she was feeling anxious and guilty about the idea that at the end of this process, the government was going to send Elizabeth Holmes to jail or potentially do so. Another juror was dismissed for playing Sudoku during testimony. She told the judge it helped her to stay focused, but to him, that excuse just wasn't adding up. But the case wasn't all fun and games. She was charged with a total of 11 counts of fraud and conspiracy. She was found guilty of 4. One had been dismissed earlier. She was found guilty of 4. She won 4, and the jury hung on 3 of the counts. And here's how it worked. Here's what the government won. In short, they won on false statements to investors, but not to patients. So they won 3 counts of committing fraud on individual investors, and they won 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud on investors. Some examples of that would be that Theranos machine that where they actually purchased a third-party machine to run the tests and telling investors that Theranos was going to generate over 100 million in revenue when in fact, and break even, that was in 2014, and would generate $1 billion in revenue in 2015. And the government said that she knew, and Balwani knew, that Theranos was only going to generate a very modest amount of revenue in those years, or maybe even none in both of those years. Now, what Elizabeth Holmes won was 1 count of patient-related fraud conspiracy and 3 counts of fraud against individual patients. The government had said that Holmes and Balwani had defrauded doctors and patients by making false claims about what their machine could do, and by omitting information about some of the problems and some of the limitations, things that it couldn't do. Now, the jury did hang on 3 individual investor fraud counts. So she was convicted on 3, but the jury hung and was not able to make a decision on another 3. The result of that was, of course, she was not sentenced for those because she wasn't convicted of those. Now, Balwani was tried separately, and he was also convicted. He was sentenced to 12 years and 11 months, a little longer than Elizabeth Holmes was. One of the most controversial things about Elizabeth Holmes during this process was her double pregnancies. Trial was delayed because she was pregnant with her first child, a son with her fiance, now her husband, Billy Evans. Evans is the heir to a chain of hotels in California. She was pregnant again at the time she was sentenced, and critique was levied against her that she was using the pregnancy in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. If that was the case, it didn't work. She got a hefty 11-year sentence in keeping with the federal guidelines related to the things she was convicted for. So what that means is she is now going into prison for 85% of her 11 years and 3 months with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So they are going to be preteens or teens by the time she gets out of prison, pretty close. She was convicted in January 2022, but it's been a long time, obviously, for her to now be finally reporting to prison. There were some appeals. Her primary appeal is ongoing, but some of the intermittent appeals that kept her out of prison for a time are over. She finally has to be in federal prison in Bryan, Texas today, May 30th, 2023. It's going to be quite the switch. She's presently in a $13,000 a month estimated rental home in Silicon Valley in Woodside, California. The home was listed for sale at $135 million in September of 2021, but that's probably not really a fair estimate of the value of her house because supposedly there are 7 different homes on this property and she would only occupy one, maybe, measly 10 million or 15, something like that. But the good news for her is her new digs are going to be completely rent-free. She will not have to pay anything if you don't count the 400 plus million she owes back to the investors. She's going to be able to take a business class, although she could probably teach it, having been in business for so long. Maybe there will be some business ethics classes that will go with it. She is also supposed to have a job for at least 90 days in which she'll be paid 12 cents an hour. I'm not sure why it said only 90 days was required, but it would take her at that rate 108,000 hours or about 52 years of working to save up 1 month's rent for her supposedly $13,000 a month rent in her present home. She will very likely serve 85% of the 11 years and 3 months that she's been assigned. Now, good news for the world. She says she's going to spend her jail time working on another biotech startup. So you have 11 years left to think really hard about whether you want to invest with Elizabeth Holmes' next big venture. So give that some serious thought. Please put in the comments what you think about that. Are you looking forward to investing in Elizabeth Holmes' next big venture, or do you think you'll maybe pass? So like the video and subscribe to the channel. We cover the biggest legal cases in the news, and we have a blast on our live streams. We'll be going again tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Wednesday. We go Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, most weeks at 7 p.m., and I will see you then.